Hello everyone, people have been asking me to do a guide and I also wanted to make an in-depth build video just so I can help those who want to improve at Mage. There will also be some general tips and tricks that can apply to other builds. This video will be a little lengthy, so feel free to skip around using the timestamps. Let's start with the attributes. The most competitive split, at least from my perspective, is running 200 con and 310 intelligence. This will give you 14k HP and you will still have quite a bit of damage. Overall, this will give you a significant amount of survivability. Pair the 14k HP with Burnout and Entomb, and if you want to run Healing Tomb and Fortifying Burnout, you will be very hard to kill. However, as you can see, I am running 150 con and 360 intelligence. I do believe that this is worse than running 200 con. I personally just find the extra damage more fun. Unlike other builds where you don't get much extra damage from going over 300, Mage is different, where each ability will pack way more damage, specifically the Ice Spike. For me at least, Ice Spike feels way better with each point of int you have, which is why I run 150 con. Overall, you can be pretty flexible with the attribute split. Now moving on to the skill tree. The skill tree for Firestaff is pretty straightforward. This in my opinion is the best tree for Firestaff. Pillar and Fireball are your bread and butter damage abilities and can be used against melee and ranged. From my experience, these two abilities are the most versatile and consistent compared to the other Firestaff damage abilities. Unfortunately, another popular choice is to run Flamethrower instead of Pillar of Fire. I find this ability to be a very rich get richer ability, where if you are already set up to win a duel, this is a very easy, simple way to guarantee a win. I found that against better ranged players, they will outspace you so that you can't effectively use Flamethrower, and against better melee players, they will know how to punish Flamethrower and out DPS you. Additionally, running Flamethrower will mean you will not be able to get the Runes of Helios skill, which adds a huge burst of damage whenever off cooldown, which is why I think this is the best. This is my skill tree for Ice Gauntlet. Compared to Firestaff, the Ice Gauntlet tree can be much more flexible. This is because a lot of the Ice Gauntlet abilities are useful in their own respective way. The tree I am running is purposed towards maximizing burst damage with the spike, and also acting as a survivability tool. Everything on the left skill tree is pretty much purposed towards facilitating burst damage from Ice Spike. I take no points under Storm, as the sole purpose of Storm is to help with Ice Spike damage and possibly root your target with Heavy Freeze. The extra % damage perk for Storm is not worth it because Storm does very little damage to begin with. Unless you want to pad damage, I found that the other perks are just more useful. Everything on the right skill tree is purposed towards survival. Entomb is by far Ice Gauntlet's strongest ability. The temporary invulnerability paired with the Fortify and Debuff Cleanse, in addition to the Healing Tomb perk, gives you so much survivability. Additionally, the perks you pick up outside of the Entomb perks, all are purposed towards helping you survive. If you feel like you don't need the survival, you can replace Entomb with Deadly Frost, which will rend the target, leading to a higher damage spike, and will also root them in place, making it easier to land spike. Another variation would be running Storm, Ice Shower, and Entomb, which would be solely focused on CC and survival, rather than the burst that spike gives. Another variation would be Storm, Pylon, and Entomb. While Pylon is a very simple, straightforward ability, I find that it is mostly used for padding and chip damage, and is decent in 1v1 duels. Overall, Ice Gauntlet is a very flexible weapon and can be purposed towards many different playstyles. Alright, so moving on to gear, the most important piece of your gear is going to be your Firestaff. As you can see, I run Flame Attunement, Empowering Fireball, and Enchanted. I personally like Enchanted a lot, as I do a lot of dueling and small-scale PvP even in OPR, so Enchanted really helps out my single target damage. Don't get me wrong, I am not saying that Enchanted is best in slot. Best in slot would be Vicious, Flame Attunement, and Empowering Fireball or Refreshing Pillar of Fire. However, there are a few more that are decent. For example, instead of Vicious, Keenly Empowered is also a great substitute. Overall, your staff can have some variety of traits and still be good, but I would recommend that you have at least Flame Attunement, and either Empowering Fireball or Refreshing Pillar on your staff. Let's move to armor. Every piece of your armor should have Resilient, that is just a required trait to be competitive in PvP, as crits just do too much damage without Resilient. Other than Resilient, the other traits that I highly recommend would be certain ability traits. These would be Empowering Fireball, Refreshing Pillar of Fire, Iced Refresh, Unending Thaw, and Healing Tomb. 2 out of these 5 perks should be on your weapons, however, would recommend getting the remaining perks on your armor. Once you have gotten these traits, you can be a little more flexible. BIS would be filling in the traits left on your armor with Elemental Aversion and/or Freedom. Elemental Aversion would be better overall, whereas Freedom is better for 1vx. However, other good options would be Refreshing or Vigor. Until recently I had mediocre armor, using a few purples and only possessing Resilient and the highly recommended traits I listed earlier, and I still did decent in PvP encounters and OPR. You can do well even in crappy armor, so as long as you have full Resilient, you should be fine. Moving on to jewelry, I am running the Champion's Ring and Amulet. These 2 pieces are close to best in slot and you can get it for free just from the PvP track. However, a BIS amulet would have either thrust, slash, or fire protection rather than shirking empowerment, depending on what you struggle with the most. A best in slot ring would have fire damage rather than keen awareness. As for the earring, what I have is BIS for Mage, the extra stamina plus the healthy toast give you much more survivability. As for refreshing toast, that does not require an explanation. The best Heartrune for Mage is Stoneform. It acts as a get of jail free card and can get you out of very dangerous situations if used correctly. The defense, healing, and most importantly CC immunity is just too valuable. However, you can be flexible with the Heartrune to fit your playstyle. My other personal favorites are Detonate, Grasping Vines, and Bile Bomb. An important part to cover would also be playstyle. The nice part about Mage is that it is a very versatile class. You have great AoE, decent single target, and great survivability, which leads to a variety of playstyles. I will be going over 2 main playstyles this video, which will be my playstyle, an aggressive, skirmish/assassin mage, and a more general consistent teamfight mage. First, let's discuss assassin/skirmish mage. You have 2 main goals in this playstyle. One is to target important enemies and kill them, which are mainly squishy high damage DPS, such as bows or muskets. The other target would be healers. In the right hands, a Firestaff who can consistently land auto attacks, fireballs, pillars, and spikes will essentially function as a ranged burst assassin. The other goal is to essentially draw as much pressure as you can without dying. By pressure I mean the attention and resources of enemy players. Simply taking away the attention of 2 to 3 players makes a huge difference. Kite them, waste their time, and ideally kill them. The more players that are chasing you trying to kill you, the better, as there will be less enemy players for your team to worry about in the fight mid, Baron, or wherever the main fight of the match is taking place. Let's move on to Teamfight Mage. This playstyle has a very simple role. Pump as much damage as you can in teamfights. The difficult part of this playstyle is knowing where to deal your damage. You will want to prioritize clumps of enemies but not always the largest. For example, if the team fight has a lot of enemy healers all throwing down sacred ground on the clump of super tanks, probably don't focus that clump. Instead I would be focusing maybe a small clump of 3 to 4 players fighting outside of the main clump, or possible a small clump of backline players, or 2 healers group up together, etc. Overall, this playstyle is pretty straightforward. You want to deal the most impactful damage as possible and stay out of danger. A crucial part of Mage and most builds are matchups. I will be talking about the different matchups that you will face as Mage. The first matchup is against melee Bruisers. This matchup is probably Mage's best matchup. With tools such as Burnout for kiting and Entomb for when melees get close to you, Mage is great against melee Bruisers. With proper kiting and good usage of your Burnout and Entomb, you are favored in these fights. The second match is against Rangers, or just bows in general. This is probably Mage's most difficult matchup. Unless you flank them, you will most likely lose this fight as they simply outrange you. If you encounter a good bow player, they will kill you before you can land a hit on them. Especially at longer distances, Firestaff abilities and basic attacks become very easy to read and react to. My advice for this is to work on your movement and dodging and use terrain to your advantage. Your entire focus should be gap closing. Jump around, time your dodges to their autos, hide behind rocks, whatever you have to do to get closer. The third match is against other mages. This is simply an even matchup. Whoever dodges more Firestaff abilities will most likely win. And be wary of Flamethrower. If you know they run Flamethrower, keep your distance, you have more long-range tools. Kite them out and you will kill them. The fourth matchup is against tanks. Tanks are tricky. Most of the time, you will lack the damage to kill them in a 1v1 setting, depending on their skill and gear. However, they will also lack the damage to kill you as long as you kite properly. This is essentially a stalemate matchup. The fifth matchup is against healers. This can also be a stalemate matchup. If the healer is good, can dodge well, and times their healing well, you will never be able to kill them in a 1v1 setting. However, if they do not dodge well, and you land every single ability including autos, it is possible to burst down healers. It will depend on the healer's skill and gear. Now we will discuss improving with the Firestaff. I know that many of you are looking for a game-changing tip that will magically improve your gameplay. However, that tip does not exist. All I can really say is you need to practice. Practice landing your Firestaff abilities consistently and landing your basic attacks. Pay attention to how far you are from your target and how far your crosshair must be for your abilities and basic attacks to land. While OPR can be decent practice, the best way to improve would be to duel other players, specifically players that steamroll you. Playing against the best is the fastest way to improve. Now this is probably what the people tuned in for. Improving in Ice Gauntlet, or more specifically Ice Spike. Some things you should know about the spike before you practice. The Ice Spike has a center point, where it will deal the most damage. This center point is actually a little to the left of the spike, so when you aim to do a spike, your crosshair should be a little to the right of the target. However, the best way to get better at spikes is simply to practice. A good way to practice is just to spike every mob in the PvE content you do or to practice on the dummies in war camps. Another tip is to look down while spiking. This gives you a better view of the spike and when to stop versus looking straight at the target. Moving on to the advanced tips. Let's start with managing cooldowns. This not only applies for Mage, but also applies to other builds as well. Each build will have survivability cooldowns, such as Evade, Flesh, Evade Shot, and in Mage's case, Burnout and Entomb. These two abilities are by far Mage's most powerful skills. Managing these cooldowns in harmony with your potion cooldowns and stamina is how you survive. Besides health, stamina is the most important resource you have. Always try to keep your stamina above 0 and if you run out, have Entomb and Burnout at your disposal to gain distance or be safe until your stamina recovers. Knowing which attacks to dodge versus which attacks to take is essential when it comes to PvP. For example, dodging every single basic attack from a weapon is most likely not a good idea. It would be better to tank the occasional basic attack and save your stamina for more threatening attacks/abilities. Now, advanced tips with the Firestaff. I must really stress the importance of landing basic attacks on the Firestaff. While the abilities are where the majority of your damage is coming from, landing basic attacks I would say has equal importance as landing your abilities, especially against good players. The Firestaff abilities are pretty telegraphed, besides Pillar of Fire, and easy to dodge. When the enemy player has no threat of chip damage from basic attacks, they will conserve their stamina for your abilities. If they manage to dodge your abilities, you will most likely lose the fight. However, if you land basic attacks, this will most likely result in the enemy player burning stamina to dodge your basic attacks. Not only does this mean less stamina to dodge your abilities, but you can time your fireball and pillar to hit them as they exit their dodge animation. Additionally, heavy attacks in my skill tree reduce my Firestaff cooldowns. If you land heavies consistently, you will end up going through multiple cycles of your. Another tip is what I call the sky pillar. If you watched my other videos, you will see me from time to time look up at the sky and then pillar. This is pretty much used against an enemy on high ground and or to get enemies through short walls. If an enemy is standing on the OPR fort wall or behind it, you can land pillar on them by looking up at the sky. Here are a few clips. The main important tip for Ice Gauntlet is to always use your abilities together. The perk Refreshing Frost that we took, reduces Ice Gauntlet cooldowns every time you use an Ice Gauntlet ability in a frosted area. This means that you should almost always storm into Entomb inside the storm. Usually what I do on Ice Gauntlet against melees will be to drop Storm on top of myself as they gap close, then Entomb into Spike. This takes huge chunks out of the Ice Gauntlet cooldown and essentially allows me to use Ice Gauntlet cooldowns twice per fight. One last tip for improving is to stop crutching on the idea that you lost a fight because of gear. Once you have 5 resilient and a decent weapon, gear is no longer an excuse. While there may be times that gear does make or break the fight, don't blame it. 99% of the time, there is something that you could have done differently in the fight. I find that blaming gear not only leads to slower improvement but also makes me more tilted. I hope you enjoyed my guide. I hope that it was helpful to you. Laughing face.